This video is sponsored by Voyager. These are what they call space shoes, which are essentially two separate hoverboards for each foot, and an electronic Tony Hawk signature skateboard. Genuinely, these things are really fun. I've included a link in my description below where you can find out more information.
Ooh, that's nice. What really helped me with skateboarding is...
Alright, you ready?
Okay, what are we starting with?
Alright, I'm ready.
Alright, so today we're gonna be doing...
Wait, sorry.
Oh my god. Oh my god, bro.
Alright, go ahead.
Wow, I was like ready. Nah, I'm not feeling it now. Gotta wait for it to come back. Oh! Today we're going to be doing like a tutorial. It's not so much as a trick tip as to manuals, but more or less how to do them better or figure out how to balance it easier. So a manual is essentially when you lift your front truck off the ground and you're just bouncing on your back truck, your back two wheels, and you just try to hold that as long as you can between letting your front wheels touch the ground and letting your tail touch the ground. Because if your tail scrapes the ground, that also means that the manual doesn't count anymore. There's actually an entire account called Wecking Ball where he literally just calls people out on scraping their tail and letting their toe touch. Yeah, your feet can't touch the ground either. So literally, back two wheels on the ground, front truck off the ground, no tail scraping, no front wheels on the ground. And a nose manual is the same thing, except you do it on the front of your board. So your nose is closer to the ground, your back truck's off the ground, and the same balancing rules apply. I think one of the best things about manuals is you can literally start to play with manuals the second you get on a skateboard. Manual's not a trick that you're gonna learn and then put away as you get better. Manuals will literally follow you regardless of how good of a skateboarder you are. There's always things that you can do with it and you can always improve. There's never too much manual practice. And what's cool is, when I figured out manuals for myself, when I started like really getting good at them, I was in a basement by myself, stationary, and I would just try to balance it in like, you know, a 5 square foot concrete pad. So you can really like get better at them if you have just any flat ground at all. So if you can figure it out while standing still, it's gonna make it easier to do it in motion. Getting good at manuals helps you balance just in general. A lot of grinds are based off of manuals. Riding your skateboard, I mean, that balance alone just becomes a lot easier once you master just being on two wheels. It's a really good beginner trick to start to master, and the sooner you start playing with this trick, the more it's gonna benefit you in the future. Oh! One of the other really cool things about this trick is it's relatively like safe and it's low to the ground. Not a lot of room for like serious injury. If you get really good at it, it's still just as relevant or has just as much shock value as those bigger and gnarlier tricks. There's a big difference between nose manuals and manuals as far as tricks. One of the things you'll notice when you see people doing manuals is they tend to scrape, and that's how they lose the manual. It's much more rare for someone to set their front trucks down than it is for them to scrape. So I always tend to keep my front truck closer to the ground because I know it's less likely that I'm going to set it down and more likely that I'm going to scrape. Whatever direction I'm riding, that's usually the direction that I tend to lean more towards. You can't be too stiff with it, and you kind of like bend in the middle, so like where your like hip meets your like belly or whatever you want to call it, that's usually where like the bend actually takes place for both nose manuals and manuals, just you're bending in different directions. Your upper body stays straight, your lower body is what kind of like does this. You're kind of like bending in the middle to help you balance. I always think it's better to move your arms less or have less arms to move. So whenever I do manual tricks, when I first get into it, I'll use both arms to balance, but then I'll eventually try to take my back arm for both nose manuals and manuals and just use my front arm to like kind of like balance me. Just because the more arms I have moving around, the more my body weight's kind of being tossed around. So if you only use one arm, it's just less room for air. The faster you're skating, due to physics, the easier it is to balance. So if you're like doing a really, really long manual, you're not only gonna get to the manual pad, the end of the manual pad faster, it's gonna actually be physically easier to balance. So speed always helps me a lot with like manuals that I'm struggling with. Momentum is your friend when it comes to manuals. The more momentum, the easier to balance. I'd say the best placement for your foot for both manuals and nose manuals is having 75% of your foot on the tail or the nose, whatever the pivot point is, 75% of your foot on the slope, and then 25% of your foot on the flat of your board. I think that's kind of like the perfect spot to just kind of like get a good balance going back and forth between like the pivoting point. If you have your foot all the way on the tail, it's just your front foot's gonna be fighting your back foot a lot more than if it's kind of in a little sweet spot. So just a little bit of your foot on the flat of your board is a good idea. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of pro skaters, they'll get into a manual trick and they'll actually kind of do a little hop to get their foot where they need it to be. Now with flip tricks out, that's different. You're gonna want your foot to be kind of set up for that particular flip trick, but just in basic manuals, it's always easier to have your foot kind of in that pocket. When balancing manuals, it's easier for me to balance it if I'm leaning heel side, like leaning back on my heels and balancing it, so my truck's a little cockeyed. And for nose manuals, it's easier for me to hold it if I'm leaning a little bit toe side. I don't know why it's like that, but it's what always works for me. The difference between loose trucks and tight trucks in manuals, it's kind of up for debate. So you would think if you have tight trucks, you're not rocking back and forth, so it's once again less margin for error. But I personally think that having the looser trucks and being able to rock back and forth helps me correct my misbalance. So some of the great manual skaters like Seva, he rides really tight trucks. But Daewon San, also an amazing manual skater, rides really loose trucks. So I think it's just personal preference, but if I had to guess, based on physics, I think loose trucks are actually better for manuals. For me, it helped to just picture that I'm balancing just on two wheels that are rocking back and forth, you know? Like I just envision that my board's see-through and I'm just balancing on those wheels on like a cockeyed balance board. That's all it really is. It's just a balance board that's just offset a little bit. If you think too much of it as a trick, I think it just can kind of get complicated. I always pretend that I have to manual further than the end of the manual pad because personally, I have a tendency when I get close to the end of the manual pad that I'll start to kind of panic and like overthink the end of the manual pad and I'll either set it down or scrape because I'm overthinking it too much. So just being more relaxed the whole time, coming to the end of the manual pad because you're planning to manual further than it really helps you balance it out and be set up the way that you want to set up so you're not like, okay, here comes the end of the pad, I got to get my feet right. Like, just relax till you get there. When you're learning nose manuals, a lot of people, like I said, I tend to lean more towards scraping my nose. A lot of people set down their manuals because they're afraid they're going to scrape their nose and roll their ankle or scrape their nose and fall forward. I've scraped my nose 1,000 times in my life and I've never once rolled my ankle on a nose manual. So like that, it's an irrational fear of if you scrape your nose, it's way more dangerous than if you scrape your tail. Unless you're like bombing some really, really rough hill and you're going ridiculously fast, you scrape your nose, you're probably gonna keep on balancing or you're just gonna step off. So don't be afraid to lean too far forward. It's actually kind of safer to fall forward on a nose manual because you can see what's going on than to slip backwards on a manual. Like I said, this isn't really an explanation on how to do the trick. It's more like how to do the trick better and to really figure out and understand the way manuals work. And once you understand like those basic balancing pressure points, it just becomes like a whole world of possibilities for tricks. It helps you connect grinds to it connects everything, kind of like in Tony Hawk Pro Skater, where you just like connect a bunch of tricks to manuals. Don't do it that dumb, but more or less that's what it does. And yeah, if you want a more detailed, in-depth of just like how-tos like that, I actually work for a skate school called Skateboard Academy. You can find them, link right wherever. I guess he could put it in his description. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know. Should I say something else? Are you zooming in on my teeth?